in Rome, Italy, a Bachelor of Theology from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, Nairobi, a licentiate in philosophy from the Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome, and a PhD in philosophy from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. His area of specialization is theoretical philosophy, and his area of research concentration includes metaphysics, epistemology, and philosophy of religion. He is a member of the Philosophical Society of Southern Africa, Philippine National Philosophical Research Society, Southern African Association for Institutional Research, and an associate member of Council for Research in Values and Philosophy, RVP. Dr. Patrick Aleke, title is Hermeneutics and Realms of Meaning. Welcome, Dr. Patrick Aleke.
Good morning once more, colleagues. So what I'm going to do here today is to look at why is it possible for us who have or seem to have the same worldview, coming from the same context, sometimes even interpret the same text differently. Why is there such thing as hermeneutical error? So the objectives of my presentations are there to show that the human world and existence is a hermeneutical space and experience. So wherever we are always trying to understand and trying to interpret, and we cannot escape that. And to show that understanding and interpretation are closely related, sometimes called equivalent or the same. If you don't understand, you can't interpret. And to explore the relationship between hermeneutics and realms of meaning. And for me, that is where the problem comes. If we misjudge the realm of meaning in which we are interpreting from, or from which a text is given, there's going to be hermeneutical error. So the first point there is what I've already mentioned. We can't live without understanding and without interpreting. Our experience is always about understanding what we perceive, what we see, what we encounter, and trying to interpret it. The human relationship is all about interpretation, and our world and our existence is hermeneutical space. So, and this is because every symbol, human symbol, text, languages carry meaning. And if we want to do that, if we want to live, we need to understand, know what meaning each symbol is carrying. Excuse me a bit. I wanted it to be on a presentation, but it wasn't. Okay. Okay, but if we are always trying to understand, understanding by itself is not sufficient. You can understand, but that is your understanding. You don't live alone. When you understand, you engage with people, and in engaging with people, there is the need to transmit that which we have understood, the translation of meaning. And it is in this translation that sometimes the problem with interpretation comes, because if I have understood and I'm trying to communicate it to someone else, the person will either get it or not get it. That is where the problem will come. So interpretation also sometimes requires that we go beyond our own horizon. We move to different worldviews. And when we go into that, problem might arise because meaning might change from one worldview to another. That is where hermeneutics in itself is important, because now it helps us to navigate when meaning begins to change. For instance, something might seem obvious to people of a certain culture, a certain group, a certain community. When it is moved across time and distance, it becomes something completely different. Okay, the point I would like to stress at the moment is looking at hermeneutics and realms of meaning. I'm going to focus on modern and contemporary hermeneutics. I'm not going to the time before the 19th century. And if I must say one reason for that is because prior to the 19th century, hermeneutics and exegesis were taken as one and the same, and it was biblical hermeneutics. And at the end of the day, in that, most often it is philological in nature. So they look at the structure of language in order to interpret that which seems to be hidden. However, with modern hermeneutics, the understanding became broader, and the first person we will encounter there is Schleiermacher, because he came with a different understanding, one would say, about hermeneutics. This exactly is what I was saying. So in that, at the beginning, it was looked at as science of interpretation up till around the 19th century, until Schleiermacher came and said, wait a bit, it is not just a science, it is an act. It is the act of, part of art of thinking, an art of understanding. One of the things that comes here is it is not just about excavation, going back to what is hidden, but understanding that which is even before us. If we look at modern hermeneutics and contemporary hermeneutics, we might say it is a transition from biblical through philosophical to intercultural hermeneutics. And I will look at some people in that area. When I talk about biblical, I've already mentioned it, but when we look at Schleiermacher, he's still coming from that view, but his is beyond how it was looked at. Because in understanding hermeneutics as act of interpretation, art of understanding, part of art of thinking, what he put there is that it is no longer just philological, but it is also philosophical. And that is why his hermeneutics or his hermeneutical thinking is called the first turn or first turning point in hermeneutics. Because if I borrow from what Professor Denis was doing, there is historical aspect in that. Because even biblical interpretation with the Protestant Reformation changed. It has to be only about the scriptures. Tradition had nothing to offer or much to offer. And for them, it's about looking at the text as it is. That even where the philosophical understanding of hermeneutics began to emerge. So according to him, hermeneutics is this act of understanding, and he says that it doesn't exist in general. At the end of the day, you have a specific hermeneutics. But an interesting point he puts here is that for you to do hermeneutics, you need to be familiar with the object. The object here could be the text, but also you need to be familiar with the originator of the object, the producer, the author of the text. That is important for him. So he contends that also this another aspect there, that hermeneutics as part of understanding does not entail the presentation of understanding. They are two different things. You will have to know what you want to do. About familiarity, because this is important for him, and this is where the whole notion of pre-understanding in hermeneutics is important. Say one must already know a man in order to understand what he says, and yet one first becomes acquainted with him by what he says. It seems like it's a circle. You know in order to understand, but you understand in order to know. At a first instance, it looks like a paradox, and indeed it is paradox. And that is what is called a hermeneutics circle in Schleiermacher. Because you have to go between the two, pre-understanding and understanding. Pre-understanding itself is not enough, good enough for you to interpret. Pre-understanding helps you to do proper understanding and to interpret correctly. Put in a different word, all he's saying is that hermeneutics does not take place in a vacuum. There is a quotation there where he talks about the pre-knowledge of the object, that is the subject matter, and the pre-knowledge of humans, of the author. Another element I want to point here, because that is interesting for what we are talking about, relative meaning of meaning. He doesn't say anything about that. But when he talks about hermeneutics, he distinguishes between two kinds of interpretation, grammatical and psychological. Grammatical will be analysis of the text, looking at the grammar and all that. Psychological interpretation is trying to understand the author of the text, and both of them are important for him. Okay, the dual relationship or moment in his hermeneutics is interesting because the first point he highlights is that every interpretation is context bound. And if we don't look at that, then there is going to be a problem. There is another distinction he makes here, which I find interesting. I'm not going to explore it here, but probably during the question time, that there are two methods. One is comparative, when you are doing hermeneutics, and one is divinatory. Comparative in simple terms is that in hermeneutics you do analysis. The analysis is what is important, and comparing. And that is what this has to do most often with text. However, when it comes to divinatory, it is an attempt to have complete comprehension. Sometimes it could be intuitive. He gave example of how a story, men and women understand the Christmas Eve story. Men would try to analyze it. Is this possible? Is it possible for God to be man? While women in the story were just singing and giving praises to God. So that is important for me, because here what is at work is men and women operating from two different realms of meaning. The second person already was mentioned this morning. This is what is called a second turning point in hermeneutics, Gadamer. Always talking about hermeneutics, you would mention his name. Of course, there were many before him. Heidegger was there, Dilthey was there, or Dilthey was the person, the link between Schleiermacher and Gadamer. And when he's talking, he's also making reference to Dilthey, but I don't have time for that for the moment. So look at his understanding of hermeneutics now is beginning to change a bit. For Schleiermacher, it was the act of thinking, act of understanding. For Dilthey, it is the foundation of the human sciences. And for him, he says that hermeneutics is the phenomenon of understanding and correct interpretation of what has been understood. It's not just mere interpretation, but correct interpretation of what has been understood. And the point he highlights also in his hermeneutics, which is similar to Schleiermacher, is that hermeneutics is not, first of all, scientific method. That is not, it's not a question of scientific method. It is not concerned with gathering of verified knowledge. It is concerned with truth. It is concerned with understanding. It is concerned with knowledge. But what kind of knowledge and truth is that? Is that of human relations, of their experience. And the three experiences he will mention there is of philosophy, art and history itself. For his hermeneutics to be called the second term, what he brings out immediately is the role of language in hermeneutics. So language to him is the medium of hermeneutical experience. And he has this kind of quotation. He says, language is the medium in which substantive understanding, not just understanding, an agreement take place between two people. Okay, his conception of hermeneutical experience or understanding involves what he calls fusion of horizons. It is the horizon of the text and the horizon of the interpreter. You see the change here. In Gadamer, he will pay attention more to the text and the originator of the text. I mean, in Schleiermacher, for Gadamer, it is the text and the interpreter that is very important. And for him, that is why for him, understanding and interpretation are equivalent. So for want of time, I'm just going to another person. This here, he calls it intercultural hermeneutics. Ukpong Christmanus, a New Testament theologian. What is his own view behind his intercultural hermeneutics? He goes back to the biblical tradition and he says, to interpret biblical text in Africa, we need to take into consideration the African worldview, the African context. So the norms, the values, the principles, and insights inherent in African cultures are important for correct interpretation of the biblical text. And why he talks about it is because every interpretation, according to him, is context bound. So he will argue, I will just leave the quotation, you read it later, but he will argue there is no universal hermeneutics. It is always according to context, and there is no way you can move beyond that. Realms of meaning, I will go into this. The basic understanding is that humans experience and understand in different patterns. And there are two people here, Phoenix. He gives 6 realms of meaning, and what he does himself is that each object, an object here, I mean, it could be the text or whatever, belongs to a particular realm of meaning, and how in the 6. For instance, what he call symbolics, there you have language, mathematics, and co. That is the basic. But you have also synoptics, which is integrative. And when he talks about synoptics, what he will be talking about there will be, first of all, he says it is comprehensively integrative. What are the areas that you have there? History, religion, and philosophy. That will be what will be in that particular realm. But I'm not going much in here because for him, it is the objects that are in realms of meaning. In Lonergan is a different kind of position, that realm of meaning is not objects that are there. It is humans that operate at different strengths of meaning depending on their demand and exigencies. And he has 4 realms of meaning that he talks about, that of common sense. And that is where the basic interpretation we have are. But sometimes the demand for systematics will happen. We need to have systems. And that is where the second realm comes in, and is the realm of theory. And when you are interpreting any text, and you are coming from common sense, when it is made for theory, it will be problematic. But beyond theory also, we have another demand. That is the demand to be critical. And that will lead to a different realm, the realm of interiority, when we try to relate it to ourselves. And lastly, there is the realm of transcendence. That is the realm of being and loving God and knowing God. So, That realm, what brings it about is the transcendent yearning or exigence. So now, between the relationship between the two, the point I'm trying to make here is the realm of meaning in which a text is intended by its author will determine how it is interpreted. And when we interpret it different or away from the realm of meaning, there will be hermeneutical error. I have two examples I wanted to give, but because of time, I will mention one. It is John, the Gospel according to John, chapter 6. You can begin from 25 to verse 69. You don't need to be a Christian. You don't need to believe the text to see what is happening there. But the question is, why is it that it is the same text that Jesus had, but many of his followers interpreted it differently and they say this is a difficult teaching and left? But the same text, Peter and the other disciples remained, and when he asked them, "What about you? Are you not going?" Peter responded with a proclamation of faith. The same text, understood and interpreted differently. Why? My argument is because they were operating from two different realms of meaning, and Jesus definitely meant it for the transcendent realm, not the common sense realm. Thank you.